Have you ever wondered why stories told thousands of years ago still have the power to make us pause, listen, and reflect on ourselves? In a world that moves so fast, it's almost unbelievable that simple Buddhist folktales, short, humble, and ancient, can still touch the heart of a modern listener. Because these stories are not just myths. They are not told merely to entertain. They are mirrors that reflect our shared hopes, struggles, and longings as human beings. A rabbit willing to sacrifice itself to save another life. A monkey offering honey with pure sincerity. A grieving mother searching for a mustard seed from a home untouched by death. Or a wooden bowl treasured by a Zen master. Each of these tales carries a seed of wisdom that, once heard, feels strangely familiar. We might forget long lectures or complicated doctrines, but we rarely forget a story. A single story can cross borders, outlive centuries, and whisper to our hearts. We pass them down around the fire, in villages, in monasteries, and later through books and screens. But in the Buddhist tradition, stories are not just for filling idle moments. They are gateways into another world, where wisdom and compassion are gently but profoundly planted. In this section, we will step into such stories, to see why even a small tale can change an entire life. 1.1. The seeds of awakening hidden in every story. In an ancient village of northern India, centuries after the Buddha's passing, people still gathered to hear simple stories about him. On a full moon night, when children huddled around a fire, an old monk named Anirudh told the Jataka tale of the hare. The little hare, though tiny and fragile, was willing to leap into the fire, offering its own body as food for a starving traveler. The story ended with the revelation that in a past life, the Buddha himself was that hare. As the children listened, their eyes shimmered with a quiet realization that even the smallest being could embody boundless compassion. The wonder lies here. The story did not lecture, nor did it deliver complicated philosophy. It planted a seed, the seed of compassion. As those children grew older, whenever they saw an injured animal or a hungry person, that seed began to sprout. They didn't need to recall every word of the monk's tale. It was enough to remember the feeling while listening, and that alone was enough to guide them toward kindness. If we pay attention, we see that Buddhism has never separated itself from the art of storytelling. The Tripitaka holds hundreds of Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's past lives. They were not written to idolize a mythical figure, but to serve as mirrors for the listener. A miserly king, upon hearing of a ruler who once gave up his throne to save his people, suddenly felt humbled and began to change. A grieving mother, devastated by the death of her child, heard the story of the mustard seed and realized that no family escapes death. Her heart shifted from despair into understanding. In Buddhism, stories are a form of upaya, skillful means. If you are already full, nothing more can be poured in. The young American never forgot that lesson. He realized that only by emptying the "I already know" could he truly learn. The simplicity of the story gave it power. In a Western society filled with theories and debates, the image of an overflowing cup became vivid, unforgettable. It planted a seed. Be empty, so you can receive. What makes Buddhist stories unique is not grandiose spectacle. They are not like Greek myths of mighty gods, nor just fairy tales to lull children to sleep. They are mirrors of ourselves, our fears, our desires, our hidden tenderness. And when we listen, we see ourselves within them. But there is another reason why stories are gateways rather than walls. They open onto many layers of meaning. A child listening to the hare will remember kindness. An adult may perceive the teaching of non-self. A practitioner may see the perfection of the bodhisattva path. The same story, but each consciousness walks through a different door. Imagine yourself in a temple garden in Kyoto, autumn leaves drifting. Wind brushes across a rock garden as an old Zen master tells you the famous koan, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" The listener sits bewildered, yet the question lingers. It offers no answer, only a haunting trace in the mind. That very restlessness compels us to keep. Perhaps 10 years later, in a sudden moment, realization dawns. And at that moment, the story comes alive again within us, stronger than any lecture. Today, in the modern world, we still need such stories. Amid endless noise and information, What we remember are not theories, but images. A hare leaping into fire, an overflowing cup of tea, a grieving mother searching for a mustard seed. These images are the entryways through which wisdom enters. Perhaps this is why Buddhism could cross borders and cultures, because of its stories. From India to Tibet, from China to Japan, from Southeast Asia to Europe, each land retells them differently, but the heartbeat remains the same, planting seeds of awakening. So when we listen to these stories, we are not just hearing anecdotes. We are stepping through a doorway that leads into our own inner landscape. And once we step through, we will never see the world in the same way again. 1.2. Why folk tradition chose parables over dogma. Throughout human history, as Buddhism spread beyond the ancient land of India, it passed through countless cultures and entered into the everyday life of diverse communities. In each place, the Dharma was not preserved solely in scriptures, but also merged into folk traditions, often through parables and legends drawn from ordinary life. This was not accidental. People long ago realized that the deepest wisdom cannot truly reach the human heart if presented only in rigid, dogmatic language. Yet a story, no matter how simple, even one a child could understand, has the power to open profound layers of meaning within the soul. In Tibet, the lamas did not only expound lofty philosophy. They often told parables during their teachings so that shepherds on the steppes, merchants in the markets, and even children who could not yet read could absorb the lesson. One master told the tale of a proud eagle who soared high but did not realize that its very shadow frightened the small birds below. The hidden message was a reminder about arrogance and how it can unintentionally bring suffering to others. Listeners might not remember every word of a sutra, but the image of that eagle would linger in their minds. In Tang Dynasty China, Buddhism entered folk life through stories told in temple courtyards, where farmers and students gathered during festivals. Instead of abstract theories, Zen masters conveyed truths through parables. A monk asked his teacher, "What is ultimate truth?" The master pointed to a tree and said, "Look at it, it is standing there." The audience burst into laughter, but within that laughter lay a seed of awakening. It was this simplicity and closeness to daily life that allowed parables to become the natural pathway through which Buddhism entered people's hearts. If we turn to the West, where Buddhism arrived much later, we find the same pattern. When Thich Nhat Hanh came to Europe, but it was the simplicity of such stories that moved them. A parable does not command or dictate. It invites each person to discover the lesson within themselves. The strength of a parable lies in the children listened with wide eyes, stirred by feelings they could not yet name. They did not need lectures on the concept of bodhisattvas or the philosophy of compassion. They only needed to remember the story, and as they grew, their hearts would be softened by its imprint. In Europe, a professor of Buddhist studies once remarked, "What philosophy cannot hold in the students' minds, a story can." He explained that while many students quickly forgot Buddhist doctrines, they never forgot the story of the mother searching for a mustard seed or the story of the ever-flowing river. To grasp, but a story can live for thousands of years, touching the shared humanity in every heart. It is worth noting that parables do not diminish the value of Buddhist wisdom. On the contrary, they embody the very principle of skillful means, upaya, the path the Buddha and other great teachers themselves chose. The Buddha rarely taught through rigid dogma. He often told stories, using concrete images and simple examples to guide listeners from confusion toward awakening. It was precisely this approach that ensured the Dharma's timeless vitality. Thus, we can say that folk. But if only the intellect is addressed while the heart is ignored, truth may slip away like sand through the fingers. In today's modern world, overwhelmed by information, parables prove their power. Merely for entertainment, they were bridges between the finite and the infinite, between the smallness of human life and the vast yearning to uncover the meaning of existence. Human beings can survive without many things, but not without meaning. We need food to nourish the body, but we also need an invisible map to guide the soul. And that map often comes in the form of a story. When we listen to a tale of a journey, a character enduring suffering, or an event that stirs compassion, we instantly see ourselves reflected in it. Behind the joy, sorrow, loss, or triumph of the characters, we recognize our own shadows. In that sense, stories become sanctuaries, places where we rediscover direction in the moment's life feels devoid of purpose. In a small African village, elders tell children about a lion who learned to weep after realizing that his strength brought fear to all creatures. The children laugh, but then they ponder. Perhaps strength must walk hand in. Wherever human beings exist, they long to find meaning through stories. Why stories and not formulas or rigid doctrines? Because meaning is not something grasped solely by reason. It must also be felt. For the soul, a spreadsheet may reveal facts, but not meaning. Yet a novel, a film, or a folk tale can still transform how we see ourselves and our place in the world. From the beginning, humanity has been a storytelling species. We do not live merely to survive. We live to understand. And to understand, we need stories. They are the hidden current binding generations together. Fascinating in the history of world culture, the stories of the Buddha's past lives are not only preserved in Buddhist scriptures, but have also traveled across nations, retold in countless forms. There lived 4 unusual friends, a hare, a monkey, a jackal, and an otter. They shared food, protected one another from danger, and supported each other in times of scarcity. In those days, harvests were uncertain, food was often scarce, and selfishness could easily become instinct for survival. Yet, amidst these struggles, their friendship endured. One day, Indra, the lord of the heavens, wished to test the hearts of earthly beings. He disguised himself as a poor ascetic, hair disheveled, robes in tatters, his steps weary and slow. By late afternoon, when the sun was sinking, the ascetic came to each of the animals asking for food. The otter remembered the fish it had caught in the river and offered it to him. The jackal unearthed a piece of meat it had hidden away and gave it to the ascetic. The monkey, quick and agile, climbed a tree and brought down ripe golden mangoes to place in his hands. Then it was the hare's turn. Unlike the others, good of others. In Western tradition, sacrifice is often tied to heroes and saints, those who give up their lives for ideals or for their community. But here, in this Jataka tale, sacrifice was not about glory or reward. It was simply the natural outpouring of a pure heart. And that is what makes this story timeless. Today, when people look at the moon, the hare's image still raises a question. Do we dare to live not only to hold on to what is ours, but also to give? In seemingly small acts, giving up a seat to the elderly, sacrificing personal gain for the greater good, or taking time to classrooms in the West. It is more than just an old tale. It is a mirror that reflects a path. Sacrifice, when born from compassion and wisdom, is itself the road to freedom. 2.2. The Tale of the Gentle Elephant, when compassion overcomes violence. In the lush tropical forests of ancient India, when humankind still lived in close bond with rivers and mountains, there lived a great white elephant, its skin shining like moonlight, and its eyes soft as those of a child. This elephant was in fact one of the past lives of the Buddha. It was not only the ruler of the forest, but also a elephant locked in an iron cage, starving it for days, tormenting it with spears at night. Yet through the pain, the elephant never grew angry. It only gazed at its tormentors with pity. Elephant's cage. If the elephant is truly gentle, he said, let us see how it reacts when provoked. The men shouted, cursed, and tried to stir its anger. But instead of lashing out, the elephant gently used its trunk to untie their ropes, bowing its head as if to say, do not be afraid. I will not harm you. The entire court was stunned. The king himself, witnessing this arrogance and pride, he ordered the elephant released and vowed to rule with virtue, never again through oppression. The white elephant returned to the forest, where moonlight bathed the trees in silver. From then on, whenever people saw it wandering peacefully among the woods, they felt a deep calm, as though the entire jungle was breathing compassion. The tale of the gentle elephant is more than a Jataka story of the Buddha's past life. It is a mirror for humanity. True strength lies not in muscle or weapons, but in the ability to transcend hatred. In a world where violence so easily takes root, from households to nations, Compassion is the only force that can break the endless cycle of vengeance. Even today, with wars, conflicts, school violence, and domestic abuse still present, the image of the gentle white elephant stands as a reminder. If even an animal can choose forgiveness over aggression, why can't human beings, endowed with reason and hearts capable of boundless love, do the same? From that ancient legend, the message still resounds. Let compassion overcome violence. For only when we bow inwardly and look upon others with eyes of empathy rather than enmity, will humanity finally understand the true meaning of strength. 2.3. Jataka and the shared legacy. Altruism as the foundation of a humane society. When we mention the Jataka, many people immediately think of the Buddha's past life stories with their symbolic images, a rabbit willing to sacrifice its own body to feed a starving traveler, an elephant enduring violence without retaliation, or a prince renouncing his throne to save his people. But if we stop at the religious aspect alone, we miss the universal power of the Jataka. In reality, these stories have become part of humanity's shared legacy, for they are not only tied to Buddhism but also touch upon the deepest human aspiration, to build a society based on altruism rather than violence and selfishness. In many cultures, from India to Sri Lanka, from Myanmar to Thailand, the Jataka tales were not only told in temples but also echoed in marketplaces, during village festivals, and even in the palaces of ancient dynasties. Artisans carved images of the Buddha's past lives onto stone walls, painted them on cave murals, or staged them in traditional plays. For common people, listening to or watching these, overconsumption spread ever wider. The Jataka's relevance endures. Consider the global crises of our time: wars, climate change, social inequality. At their root lie greed and selfishness. We want more resources. We want to defeat others at all costs. We want to indulge without considering consequences. Seen against this reality, the Jataka's message of altruism has never been more. Another key reason the Jataka became a shared heritage is its non-dogmatic nature. It does not coerce listeners into believing a rigid doctrine, but invites them into a world rich with symbolism. Anyone can see themselves within these tales: a father, a mother, a beggar, a king, even a forest creature. By reflecting on the stories, each person extracts lessons that suit their own circumstances. This is why the Jataka transcends religious boundaries to become a cultural foundation for all. Looking back at human history, periods of peace and prosperity were always linked with altruism and sharing. Conversely, eras of bloodshed and collapse stemmed from selfishness and ambition. Thus, preserving the Jataka is not only about safeguarding cultural heritage, but also about keeping alight a lamp to guide the future. These stories remind us that only by grounding society in altruism can we build a humane civilization, where people live for one another and not just for themselves. Through the light of the Jataka, we come to see that altruism is not blind sacrifice, but profound wisdom. It is the wisdom that recognizes the deep interconnectedness between self and others. When we benefit others, we also benefit ourselves, for we are all part of the same web of life. A society that understands this truth will no longer be divided by selfishness, but will become a community that builds and grows together. And perhaps, that is the greatest legacy the Jataka leaves us, not merely as fairy tales of a religion, but as shared lessons for all humanity. Altruism is the only foundation upon which a humane, sustainable, and compassionate society can be built. Part 3. The Monkey's Gift of Honey. Why sincerity matters more than offerings. There are times in life when we believe that, in order to show respect, we must present lavish and precious gifts. Yet history and the sacred texts remind us again and again that what moves both human beings. Offering to the Buddha. During his journeys across the plains of ancient India, the Buddha and his monastic community once paused in a dense forest. The summer was harsh, the earth cracked and dry, and the local villagers had little to offer. Yet in this stillness, an unexpected story unfolded, one that would become an eternal lesson about sincerity. In that forest lived a troop of monkeys, leaping across sala trees and feasting on wild fruits. Among them was a young monkey, quick and playful, but above all, tender-hearted. Day after day, it watched villagers approach the Buddha, kneeling down to offer what little food they had. Though meager, their faces glowed with joy at being able to express devotion to an awakened one. Watching them, the young monkey's heart stirred with. He needed no praise, no reward. It was enough to know that his heart was understood. In that moment, a simple forest creature became a great teacher in its own way, an embodiment of selfless love. Word of the story spread across the land. People retold it not just as a tale of devotion, but as a reminder to give not for fame, nor for reward, but only for love. Through the centuries, the story of the monkey's gift of honey has been inscribed in scriptures, carved on temple walls, told in sermons, and remembered as proof that simple sincerity surpasses all riches. Even today, its lesson rings true. In a modern world obsessed with appearances and wealth, the monkey of the forest still whispers, "If our heart is pure, even the smallest gift can touch another soul." But without sincerity, even mountains of gold and silver are meaningless. Thus, the monkey's offering is not just a detail in an old text. It is a mirror held up to us. Whenever we give, we must ask, with what heart am I giving? With pride or with love? And it is this answer, more than anything, that defines the true worth of a gift. 3.2. The symbolic meaning, the heart of offering, matters more than material. Throughout human history, from ancient civilizations to modern society, people have always had a tendency to measure a gift, an offering, or an act of devotion by its. But in the heart, in the sincerity, in the pure love behind the act. In the cultural setting of ancient India, offering to an enlightened one or to the monastic community was not only an act of reverence, but also a social expression. The wealthy brought abundant food, fine cloth, and gold. The poorer had nothing more than leftover rice, wildflowers, or a handful of fresh water. Measured by money, expensive gifts, and outward luxury, it is easy to confuse self-promotion disguised as charity with a genuine act of offering. But remembering the monkey's story, we realize that every layer of glitter is meaningless without sincerity. What moves people is not a grand gift, but the heart behind it. A wildflower given by a poor child at an altar can touch a mother's heart more than 100 roses from a luxury shop. A warm smile to a stranger on the street may be more precious than $1 million donation. These all point to the same truth that the monkey's honey offering emphasizes, giving from the heart, not from material wealth. This story also shows that sincerity has transformative power. Because of its pure intention, a monkey, often seen, not grand gestures, but presence in times of need. In work, not flattery, but dedication and honesty. These are what form the strength of human community and sustain moral foundations. So, when we remember the monkey and its small drop of honey, let that story become a mirror for ourselves. Each time we wish to give, let us ask, why am I giving? For recognition or for pure love? That answer alone defines the true value of any gift. And in that selfless offering, we find freedom, serenity, and the noblest essence of human life. 3.3. Today's lesson, friendships and communities endure only when nurtured by sincerity. In today's world, where bustling cities rise with an ever-accelerating pace, and where people increasingly rely on technology to connect, the value of sincerity in friendship and community has become even rarer. It is easy to click a button to add a friend on social media, yet finding a true friend who understands and walks with us is profoundly difficult. Humanity, it is not grand gifts or dazzling gestures, but the purity of an uncalculated heart that gives true meaning to every relationship. In modern Western culture, we often encounter stories of friendships built on temporary convenience. A friend may come to you when you are wealthy, at the height of success, but the moment you fall, you discover how few remain by your side. Conversely, receiving it. Within communities, sincerity also plays the central role in maintaining cohesion. Imagine a small village in the Italian countryside, where locals tend vineyards and produce wine. They preserve traditions across generations. Sincerity does not only foster trust, it becomes the foundation of culture and human connection. In reality, sincerity rarely appears adorned with extravagance. A friend may not give you expensive gifts for your birthday, Yet a single message of care on a day you feel exhausted can be enough to lift you. A community may lack grand monuments. Yet when its people genuinely share each other's burdens, they become richer than any glittering metropolis. This is a value that cannot be measured in material terms, only felt with the heart. Modern psychology has shown that having even one trustworthy friend provides resilience against depression, trauma, and life crises. The presence of someone who listens without judgment or exploitation is an irreplaceable balm for the spirit. Just as honey soothes wounds and helps them heal, so too does sincerity and friendship mend the wounds of the heart. Likewise, in communities, exploitation, they can endure anything. On the other hand, a community filled with pretense, rivalry, and calculation, no matter how wealthy, collapses easily. History confirms this. Many once mighty empires fell not to outside enemies, but to betrayal and falsehood within. When we look again at the story of the monkey with its honey, we see a lesson that stretches across all, and born of effort. That is why it lingers in memory, leaving behind a lasting fragrance in those who receive it. Today, if each of us dares to live with greater sincerity, friendships will deepen, and communities will become more resilient. Sincerity does not demand wealth, nor does it require perfection. It simply asks that we live honestly with our feelings, offering a heart free of hidden motives. This is something anyone can do, whether a monkey in the forest or a person in the heart of a great city. So, when we reflect on our own lives, we must ask, are we living sincerely with our friends and our communities, or are we hiding behind masks of formality? The answer will shape not only the quality of our relationships, but also the peace within our hearts. For just as the Buddha smiled and accepted that small drop of honey, life itself will smile upon those who offer sincerity. Though small, it is pure and beyond price. Part 4. Mucalinda rescues his mother when filial piety becomes the root of liberation. In every culture, the story of a mother's love and a child's filial devotion is inexhaustible. Yet in the teachings of the Buddha, filial piety is not limited to gratitude and providing for one's parents. It becomes a path to liberation. Here, we no longer speak merely of external rituals, but of a spiritual force powerful enough to transcend the boundaries of years across many lands, still stirring hearts to this very day. 4.1. The Courageous Son and His Descent into the Underworld. In the land of Magadha, when the Dharma of the Buddha was spreading far and wide, there was one disciple renowned above all for his mastery of supernatural powers, Mucalinda. He was not only a monk of strict practice, but also known for his deep filial devotion. Terrifying of all, before his vision arose scenes of horror, blazing fire, endless wails echoing through the darkness, countless beings burned and tormented. Amidst that sea of agony, he saw his mother, emaciated, famished, her eyes vacant, her hands trembling in desperation for a morsel of food that could never satisfy. Overcome with anguish, Mucalinda descended into hell with a bowl of rice, offering it to his mother. But when she raised the food to her lips, each grain turned into burning coals, scorching her mouth and throat. Nothing could enter her body. Only fire consumed her. Mucalinda wept bitterly. Even with the greatest powers, he was helpless before the weight of karma. In that moment he realized, no matter how great a son's love, on the day of Pavarana, the end of the rain's retreat, prepare offerings and make a great act of generosity to the monks of the 10 directions, dedicating the merit to your mother. When filial love merges with the power of the community, then the gates of hell will open and the flames of torment will subside. Following the Buddha's guidance, Mucalinda prepared pure offerings and presented them to the Sangha on the full moon of the 7th month. When the assembly of monks together recited blessings, waves of compassion spread across the cosmos, their light reaching down even into hell. Lady Sari, immersed in anguish, suddenly felt a rain of nectar soothing her suffering. The chains of torment began to dissolve, and she was released from the darkness. That story, carried through centuries, became the origin of Ulambana, the festival of filial piety, known as Vulan in many Buddhist lands. It is not only the tale of one monk and his mother, but a symbol for all children who yearn to repay their parents, and a reminder that true love must be joined with wisdom, supported by the collective force of compassion. The image of Mucalinda descending into hell is not merely a supernatural legend. It mirrors our real struggles in life, watching loved ones lost in greed, anger, or despair, bound by the consequences of their own choices. But a foundation that can open the way to liberation for ourselves, our families, and even our communities. For point 2, Ulambana, when saving one's mother is also saving oneself. In the history of, at first glance, this may sound like a mystical claim, but in truth, it touches the very roots of human spirituality and moral life. First of all, Ulambana opens up a vision of the inseparable bond between parents and children. In every culture in the world, the love of mother and father is regarded as sacred. Yet in the Buddhist spirit, this love is not only a matter of personal sacrifice, but, in torment, it was not just the tragedy of one individual, but also a mirror reflecting his own life. The suffering of the mother is the suffering of the child, for within their veins and their very consciousness, the same current flows. Ulambana also conveys a powerful communal meaning. To rescue his mother, Mucalinda could not rely on his own power alone. He had to turn to the strength of the monastic community, of collective harmony. It was through the energy of purity, compassion, and the collective prayers of the Sangha that his mother's karmic burden could be transformed. What gives Ulambana its special depth is the transformation of the inner self. When a child offers incense in remembrance of their parents, it is not merely a ritual to redeem them, but an opportunity to look within. What is truly offered is not rice, water, or fruit, for material things alone cannot overcome karma. The true power of liberation lies in heartfelt sincerity, in the transformation of the child's daily life, with less greed, less anger, and more compassion and integrity. When we change and live nobly, that itself is a way of saving our parents, for there. In saving one's mother, one also saves the shadows and bonds within oneself. For parents do not exist merely as individuals outside us. They live within us, in every habit, every thought, every breath. When we heal the wounds inside ourselves, we are also easing the suffering that lingers in our parents. In many countries, Ulambana has gone beyond religious boundaries to become a cultural event. In Japan, it is Obon. In China, the Zhongyuan Festival. In the West, Mother's Day and Father's Day echo the same spirit of gratitude and remembrance. Yet what sets Ulambana apart is its unique link between filial piety and liberation. It is not only a day to honor parents, but also a chance to cultivate oneself, to understand that filial devotion must extend beyond outward gestures into the practice of transformation and awakening. Seen more broadly, Ulambana carries a universal message. To build a wholesome society, each person must begin with honoring and caring for their parents. A society where the young know gratitude and responsibility toward their roots is one with a firm foundation. In this sense, filial piety is not only a personal duty, but also the very root of communal ethics. Thus, when a child bows in remembrance of their parents during Ulambana, they are not merely practicing gratitude, but also continuing the story of liberation. To save one's mother is to save the very bloodline within, to save the ignorance yet unresolved in one's own heart. And when each individual does this, the whole community is uplifted and the world itself is illuminated by the light of filial love and wisdom. Ulambana, therefore, is more than a festival. It is a mirror, a lighthouse guiding the way. In its light, we see that filial devotion is neither a luxury nor an empty ritual. It is a way of life, a means to transform suffering into peace, ignorance into wisdom. And ultimately, it is this very devotion that opens the gates of liberation for our parents, for ourselves, and for all humanity. 4.3. A modern lesson: cultivating filial piety in a globalized family. In today's era of globalization, when the borders between nations are increasingly blurred, when a child may be born in London, grow up in New York, attend university in Paris, and build a career in Singapore, the question of filial piety is no longer simply an Asian tradition. It has become a global challenge. How do we nurture gratitude, responsibility, and filial devotion in a world where families are separated by geography, time, and cultural differences? Physical, but also emotional, thinning the threads of connection. In the global economy, where careers and studies demand constant mobility, the value of filial piety is tested as never before. When their children live thousands of miles away, an Italian mother in Rome may quietly open her phone every day to look at old photos of her daughter now working in Tokyo. An Indian father in New Delhi may receive only a few hurried text messages each week from his son studying in Boston. These sorrows are not loud or dramatic, but they erode the heart like water dripping endlessly on stone. In such circumstances, filial devotion is no longer just about sending money or gifts, but about being present in spirit, a long enough call so that parents feel heard, a sincere enough sharing so that they feel they still belong in their children's lives. Families in globalization also face a new reality, cultural clash. Children living abroad easily absorb individualistic values, emphasizing freedom and independence. Meanwhile, parents back home cling to traditional values, cherishing closeness and responsibility. This difference sometimes creates generational rifts. But viewed through the lens of filial piety, such gaps can become opportunities for learning. Children can learn how to live freely without being ungrateful, how to build independent lives without, but the ability to nourish spiritual bonds in a rapidly changing world. It may be a child overseas who regularly writes handwritten letters to parents, like an American girl in San Francisco who. This becomes even more essential. Filial piety is not just a personal duty, but the foundation for a humane society. If Mucalinda needed the strength of the Sangha to save his mother, then today we too need community to nurture filial devotion. Schools can teach children to remember and appreciate their parents. Companies can organize family appreciation days to give employees time to reconnect. Cities can create public spaces where children and parents meet, share, and bond. Filial piety in globalization is thus not just a private matter, but a collective movement, a communal force healing the wounds of loneliness and fractured family ties. Ultimately, in a world dominated by technology, the lesson of filial piety reminds us that what humans need most is the warmth of kinship. A video call cannot replace the touch of a hand, but it can be a bridge if made with sincerity. A gift cannot replace presence, but it carries meaning if sent with gratitude. Filial devotion in modern times does not lie in outward form, but in the depth of the heart. Thus, filial piety in the global era is not a mechanical return to the past, but a rebirth of gratitude and responsibility in a world of constant change. It gives us the chance to love our parents not only through physical closeness, but through inner maturity, the ability to harmonize tradition with modernity. In doing so, we not only save our mother in the symbolic sense, but also save ourselves from the hell of indifference, loneliness, and rootlessness in the whirlwind of globalization. Part 5. The Bridge of Compassion, Folk Wisdom from Tibet. There are stories that never made their way into scriptures, yet they have been passed down for generations across the highlands of Tibet, where the wind and clouds stand witness to human life and the compassion of the Dharma. In those mountains, each folk tale is not just a piece of entertainment, but a bridge that leads us to the other shore of understanding and kindness. In this part, we will step into seemingly simple tales that contain profound wisdom, showing us that sometimes, even a wooden bridge across a gorge can be the deepest Dharma teaching on compassion and enlightenment. 5.1. The Nomad and the Bridge Built by the Master. On the windy steppes of the Tibetan plateau lived a nomad named Tsering. His life was spent wandering with his sheep and yaks, crossing snow-covered hills and rushing glacial rivers. The nomadic life was bound to solitude, yet it carried a joy, the feeling of freedom, under the vast sky. But that freedom often turned into suffering. Tsering's village lay on the opposite side of a wide river, fed year-round by the melting glaciers. Every spring, when the ice melted stronger, the river became violent, nearly impossible to cross. Villagers often had to take long detours of dozens of miles to reach the markets or the monastery nearby. Tsering had lost valuable known simply as Lama Dorje. People said he had wandered across the Himalayas, carrying nothing but a begging bowl and a gentle smile. He often stopped in places where suffering was heavy, planting seeds of wisdom and compassion. Seeing Tsering frown at the river, Lama Dorje asked, "What troubles you, my son?" Tsering sighed. "This river has taken too much from us. It cuts us off from the market, from the monastery, even from our kin. We don't have the means to build a bridge. If this goes on, our people will remain trapped in hardship." The Lama sat down beside. "When you are willing to step beyond resentment, the bridge will appear." The words puzzled and even annoyed Tsering. He thought the Lama was only speaking in riddles. But a few days later, something happened that changed his mind. A sudden flood surged, sweeping away part of Tsering's flock. His grief was unbearable, but what haunted him more was seeing a young boy nearly dragged into. It was not his flock, but life itself, human life. Afterward, Tsering went to Lama Dorje and said, "Now I understand. But how can I build a real bridge for the people?" The Lama simply smiled. "When your heart is ready, others will come to build with you." Indeed, Tsering began to rally the villagers. At first, they doubted him. How could a simple nomad build a bridge across such a fierce river? But Tsering did not give up. He shared his vision, persuaded each person, carried heavy logs from distant forests on his back. And something remarkable happened. More and more people joined in. Strong men cut timber, women wove ropes from yak hair, children fetched stones and water. Lama Dorje himself was there, not only with advice but with his own aged, steady hands. At last, a wooden bridge stretched across the river, joining the two banks. On the day of its completion, the villagers held a simple celebration filled with joy. Watching the people walk across, Tsering felt a happiness he had never known before. That true joy does not come from keeping for oneself, but from opening the heart so all can overcome suffering together. Lama Dorje looked at him, eyes gentle. "Do you see? This bridge does not only connect two banks, it connects hearts. It is built not only of wood, but of trust, cooperation, and love. That is the true bridge." The story spread throughout Tibet. People remembered not just the wooden bridge, but the teaching it carried. Every difficulty in life is a river. If we only stand in resentment, we will remain divided. But if we open our hearts, we will always find a way to build the bridge of compassion and wisdom. In the years that followed, Tsering still roamed with his yaks. But he was no longer the lonely nomad. He had become someone everyone turned to in times of hardship, for they knew within him was a bridge, the bridge of a heart that had learned to open. The bridge built by Tsering and Lama Dorje grew weathered over the years, but in the minds of the villagers, it remained unshakable. For that bridge was the very image of Dharma in daily life. Simple, humble, yet guiding people across the fiercest rivers within their own hearts. 5.2. The miraculous symbol, when compassion turns hatred into a bridge. In the snow-capped mountains of Tibet lies a small village nestled in a narrow valley called Jataka. This village is famous not only for its majestic landscape, but also for an ancient story still told by the elders, a living symbol of the power of compassion, the force that can transform hatred into connection. In the distant past, Jataka was far from peaceful. The village was once divided by two nomadic clans, the Norbu and the Wangma. Both survived on their yak herds, butter, and handmade textiles. They were originally distant relatives, but a dispute over pasture land ignited a feud that stretched across generations. The Norbu forbade crossing into Wangma. Wangma clan named Dolma. Unlike most villagers, Dolma often wandered to the stream, watching the Norbu children play on the opposite side. Deep inside, she felt the division was senseless. But to voice this thought was unthinkable. Every elder carried the feud in their bones. One harsh winter, a brutal snowstorm trapped the valley, and supplies dwindled. In this desperate time, some yak butter, warm water, and a handful of herbs. For days she stayed by his side. When the boy finally opened his eyes, he whispered weakly, "Why did you save me? I'm a Norbu." As lighting a spark near dry grass. When rumors spread, the Wangma were furious, calling Dolma a traitor. The Norbu were suspicious, fearing a trap. Yet when the boy returned, eyes shining as he spoke of Dolma's kindness, their doubts began to waver. As the storm worsened, both villages fell deeper into crisis. Herds perished, food vanished. At the height of despair, Dolma stepped forward. She carried her father's small flute, stood in the howling winds, and played a haunting nomadic melody. The sound echoed through the valley, and despite their distrust, both clans stopped to listen. Dolma spoke. Hatred has divided us, but the storm does not care who is Norbu or Wangma. If we do not reconnect, we will all vanish in this white snow. Her words stirred not only the young but across the stream that had long been a cursed border. It was nothing remarkable in design, just logs tied with yak hair ropes. Yet for Jataka, it was monumental. On the day of its completion, villagers gathered on both banks. Dolma was invited to cross first. She trembled as she saw hands reaching out from both sides, clasping one another as they walked across. From that moment, the bridge was no longer wood and rope. It was the living symbol of compassion, which had turned hatred into connection. The story of Dolma spread throughout Tibet, generations later. Today, Jataka thrives as a unified village, with Norbu and Wangma living in harmony. Few remember the exact details of the ancient feud, but the bridge still stands, a silent witness reminding all that in every conflict, compassion is the only key to reconciliation. From this story, a timeless lesson shines through. The greatest enemy is not the one across from us, but the hatred within us. The moment we let it go, we build a bridge, one that leads not only to peace for ourselves, but for the community around us. That is the true power of compassion, turning hatred into connection. Of countless generations to come. 5.3. When bridges of compassion rise amid division and war. Throughout human history, whenever societies have fallen into the abyss of division and war, people have often turned to slogans, weapons, or political treaties to repair the damage. But if we look closely, we will see that some fractures can never be healed by force. Only invisible bridges of compassion, only the wisdom that sees beyond hatred, can truly reconnect human beings to one another. And this is why the story of a bridge in Tibet is not merely a local tale, but a universal. Children grew up with the belief that the other side was their eternal enemy. One winter, however, a sudden flood swept away the only bridge across the river. That river now became a border cutting off survival itself. The school, the clinic, and the marketplace were all on the opposite side. In that moment, neither side had the strength or resources to rebuild the bridge alone. The choice was stark: either rebuild together or perish slowly in isolation. At first, no one was willing to extend a hand. They stood on opposite banks, glaring with suspicion. Then, an elderly woman named Amira Idrisi, who had lost her husband in the war, stepped forward. She carried no weapon, only a shovel. Planting it in the riverbank, she raised her head and said aloud, over carrying an old wooden plank. Their eyes still wary, their hands nevertheless began to touch in labor. Gradually, groups from both sides joined in, bringing ropes, timber, whatever they had left. Within a week, a temporary bridge of wood and rope stood across the river. What mattered was not its appearance, but the moment they stood together upon it, gazing at the rushing waters below, realizing that compassion itself had saved them from permanent division. Children ran back and forth joyfully, playing together for the first time in years. Suspicion did not vanish overnight, but the hands that had joined in building the bridge had planted the seed of deep change. The Balkan story is but one fragment of the world, yet it mirrors a truth: modern society, from politics to forgetting that no wall can bring peace. Only bridges can. In the West, efforts to build such bridges have also emerged. One example is a group of American and Iraqi veterans. After the war, they gathered at a monastery in Italy, where Tibetan monks hosted a retreat on healing trauma. At first, they could not even look one another in the eye. Their memories of loss, of fallen loved ones. Organization called Bridge of Voices, bringing together people from opposing sides to share their stories with students, with communities. They did not hide their pain, but used it to foster empathy. This shows that building bridges in polarized societies is not a lofty theory. It begins with small acts: an apology, a handshake, a sincere listening session. Yet these small acts can dismantle fortresses of hatred that have stood for decades. From a Buddhist perspective, a bridge is not merely a physical link between two banks, but also a connection between hearts. When one realizes the truth of no separate self, anatta, that all suffering arises from the same root of ignorance, one can step out of the cycle of hatred. The bridge of compassion is thus not only a social solution, but also a spiritual practice. Today's world witnesses too many walls of borders, walls of ideology, walls of technology. Yet bridges can still rise if people are brave enough to let go of ego and open their hearts to the pain of others. And when such bridges of compassion appear, they not only connect groups, but also open the possibility of a shared future where hatred is no longer an inheritance, but only a memory reminding us of the value of peace. The story of Amira in the Balkans, of the Bridge of Voices, or of anyone who dares to lay the first stone of compassion in a divided society, leaves us with an eternal lesson. Wars and divisions may destroy bridges, but compassion can rebuild them, stronger than any structure of wood or stone. And sometimes, all it takes is one person's courage to begin, for the whole community to follow. This is the practical application of Tibetan folk wisdom in the 21st century. No one can live securely on one bank forever. Only by crossing the bridge of compassion can humanity truly find its common home. Have you ever wondered why stories told thousands of years ago still have the power to make us pause, listen, and reflect on ourselves? In a world that moves so fast, it's almost unbelievable that simple Buddhist folktales, short, humble, and ancient, can still touch the heart of a modern listener. Because these stories are not just myths. They are not told merely to entertain. They are mirrors that reflect our shared hopes, struggles, and longings as human beings. A rabbit willing to sacrifice itself to save another life. A monkey offering honey with pure sincerity. A grieving mother searching for a mustard seed from a home untouched by death. Or a wooden bowl treasured by a Zen master. Each of these tales carries a seed of wisdom that, once heard, feels strangely familiar. We might forget long lectures or complicated doctrines, but we rarely forget a story. A single story can cross borders, outlive centuries, and whisper to our hearts. We pass them down around the fire, in villages, in monasteries, and later through books and screens. But in the Buddhist tradition, stories are not just for filling idle moments. They are gateways into another world, where wisdom and compassion are gently but profoundly planted. In this section, we will step into such stories to see why even a small tale can change an entire life. 1.1. The seeds of awakening hidden in every story. In an ancient village of northern India, centuries after the Buddha's passing, people still gathered to hear simple stories about him. On a full moon night, when children huddled around a fire, an old monk named Anirudh told the Jataka tale of the hare. The little hare, though tiny and fragile, was willing to leap into the fire, offering its own body as food for a starving traveler. The story ended